Imagine a rotting carcass hauled up onto a deck in 1977, the crew staring at a long neck and four flipper-like limbs and whispering the impossible word, plesiosaur. Or picture a line of fishermen off Cape Ann in 1817 firing a cannon at a sinuous animal that slid away beneath the foam. These are not fairy tales told at port taverns. They are the kinds of reports sailors have carried in their logbooks and letters for centuries, and they changed how people thought about the sea. Stay with me, because at the end of this video, we'll return to that 1977 deck, and you'll hear why scientists later argued over whether the ocean had kept a prehistoric secret. You're watching Singularity Animations. We bring forgotten slices of history, science, and mystery back to life. If the ocean gives you chills, and you want stories that make your spine prickle and your curiosity burn, hit subscribe and ring the bell. Join our fleet. Your subscription helps this channel keep digging into the weird corners of the past. There's a strange honesty to sailors' stories. They were out where compasses quaver and landmarks vanish. They saw what the rest of us could only imagine. Over the next 20 minutes, we'll sail through 7 authentic and undertold sea monster episodes, eyewitness accounts, washed-up carcasses, and local legends, each one anchored in documented reports and scientific follow-ups. I'll tell them as the sailors told them, then we'll look at what science later said. And yes, we'll finish with that modern deck photo that still sparks arguments. In the summer of 1817, something long and undulating came up alongside fishing boats off Cape Ann, Massachusetts. Multiple witnesses described a head like a serpent, a long neck, and a body with humps rising and falling in the waves. The tales multiplied. Fishermen, wives on shore, even one clergyman. And soon a committee convened by the Linnaean Society of New England recorded the testimonies. The story was so vivid that newspapers across the young United States debated whether the creature was a known marine animal, a misidentified whale or narwhal, or something entirely new. The Gloucester reports are both a window into how communities made meaning from the sea and a reminder that mass sightings, when many people at once swear they saw the same thing, have long been the backbone of sea monster lore. On a storm-swept September morning of 1808, islanders on Stronsay in the Orkneys found a monstrous carcass stranded on the shore. Witnesses measured it at an astonishing length. Contemporary reports claim as much as 50 to 55 feet and described strange features: a long, slim body, a mane-like ridge, and several flipper-like appendages. The Wernerian Natural History Society in Edinburgh debated it. Some early naturalists called it a new kind of sea serpent. Later anatomists argued it was simply a badly decomposed basking shark, an explanation that resurfaces whenever globsters, mysterious wash-ups, appear. What makes the Stronsay case special is how seriously scientists of the time took it. Sketches were made, measurements recorded, and for decades it haunted natural history debates. The Stronsay Beast shows that the line between monster and scientific specimen was blurry, especially when decomposition plays tricks on familiar anatomy. The Pacific Northwest has its own serpent, Cadborosaurus, nicknamed Caddy, named after Cadboro Bay in British Columbia. For more than a century, fishermen, First Nations elders, and coastal residents reported a long-bodied creature with a horse or camel-like head and a serpentine body that moved in vertical coils, sometimes seen alone, sometimes with a parent young. The reports are remarkably consistent in some respects: long neck, humps or coils, and flipper-like appendages. There are a few pieces of tangible evidence that cryptozoologists point to: alleged baby specimens pulled from whale stomachs, bits of tissue occasionally presented for analysis, and even short videos and photos that enthusiasts argue show a living caddy. Skeptical scientists offer more mundane explanations: misidentified whales, groups of swimming seals, or floating kelp mats. But the Cadborosaurus tradition is one of those coastal legends that keeps coming back, woven into local oral histories and some surprising physical claims. Travel further back, and the boundary between myth and scientific curiosity blurs even more.
In the 16th century, European naturalists described a sea bishop, an odd, humanoid fish clothed in what looked like episcopal robes. Versions of the tale say a bishop fish was captured in the Baltic or off Poland and presented to churchmen. The creature allegedly made the sign of the cross and was released. These reports weren't just folklore, they were printed in natural history compendia and sketched for European readers hungry for the wonders of the world. Later scholars assumed these sightings were either hoaxes, misidentified monkfish or Jenny Hannovers, or cultural attempts to impose familiar categories, like bishop, onto a strange mound of flesh. But the sea bishop stories matter because they show how pre-modern observers used religious imagery, authority, and spectacle to make sense of the sea's strangeness. 1896, the globster that launched a century of debate. In 1896, two boys bicycling along Anastasia Island in Florida found something huge, half buried in the sand, a massive, foul-smelling, unidentifiable organic mass. It was dragged free, photographed, and the specimen, later termed the St. Augustine Monster, inspired claims that it might be a giant octopus or an unknown cephalopod. For decades, the carcass was a curious emblem for cryptozoologists. Modern analysis, however, told a quieter story. Biochemical tests on preserved fragments later concluded the mass was collagenous whale blubber, in other words, a distorted, decomposed part of a whale. The St. Augustine case is crucial because it illustrates how physical samples can both fuel myth when first seen and deflate it when tested, and why globsters repeatedly confuse observers who expect neat, familiar anatomy. Local legend around the Bahamas blue holes, vertical caverns where the water goes suddenly, hauntingly dark, speaks of the Lusca, a monstrous half-shark, half-octopus that drags swimmers into black mouths of water. Unlike single eyewitness accounts on the open ocean, Lusca stories are bound to place. Andros Island's blue holes are woven into the lore. Modern documentary investigation, including investigative TV shows, tends to favor more ordinary explanations: oversized octopus misseas, big tiger sharks, or the simple psychology of a dangerous, unfamiliar environment. But Lusca lives as a classic example of a community's monster, a localized guardian of a place where humans feel unsteady and the ocean keeps its own geometry. The Lusca may be folklore, but it speaks to a deep human reaction. When the sea hides its floors, the imagination fills the hole. Those were sightings and stories that simmer in coastal memory. Now, the one I promised we'd save for last, a deck, a fishing trawl, photographs, and a controversy that went from possible living plesiosaur to pseudo-plesiosaur and still divides people who study the sea. On April 25, 1977, the Japanese fishing trawler Zuiyō-maru hauled something into its nets about 1,600 kilometers, roughly 1,000 miles east of Christchurch, New Zealand. Crew members described a large corpse with a long neck, 4 broad flippers, and a small head, images that played on everybody's prehistoric fantasies. The company photographed the carcass, took tissue samples, and the media dubbed it a plesiosaur. For a brief electric moment, the idea that a living dinosaur had been caught at sea captured public imagination. Scientists quickly stepped in. Several Japanese marine biologists examined the photos and samples and concluded the remains were most likely a decomposing basking shark or a related large fish, not a Mesozoic reptile. The pattern of decomposition in large sharks, the loss of jaws and tail, the exposure of the spine, and a retraction of tissues that form neck-like regions can create a shape shockingly similar to a plesiosaur skeleton. Still, the Zuiyō-maru case is remarkable because it happened in modern times with photographs and tissue samples, and it forces us to ask honest questions about what we trust our eyes to tell us when something large and unfamiliar comes up out of the deep. Across these episodes, a pattern appears. The sea is a strange stage. Weather warps distance and light, decomposing bodies rearrange familiar anatomies, and communities fill gaps in knowledge with vivid, culturally resonant images. Bishops, serpents, giant octopuses. Sometimes there are tangible artifacts, photos, tissue samples, the careful notes of a naturalist, and sometimes only testimonies. Scientific follow-up frequently reinterprets those artifacts into known categories: decomposed sharks, whale blubber, misidentified animals. But the reinterpretation doesn't erase the experience. What remains is the human reaction to the ocean's scale. Fear, awe, the need to name what we cannot easily explain. These 7 cases are not just curiosities, they're mirrors. They reflect the limits of human perception, the social life of belief, and the way knowledge is built and revised. Sailors' testimonies are historically meaningful because they come from people who live by the sea and whose livelihoods depend on reading it honestly. And yet, precisely because the ocean is so alien to our everyday experience, even honest reading can produce visions that frighten and enthrall. If you felt that hum in your chest while listening, the ache of curiosity, the wish that something truly monstrous might lurk beyond the horizon, then consider this. The sea is both more explainable than we think and more mysterious than we can predict. That tension is the fuel for every good maritime story. If you loved this deep dive into sailors' sea monsters, smash that like button and subscribe to Singularity Animations for more cinematic history and mysterious discoveries. Tell me in the comments which of these cases gave you chills. Were you most haunted by the medieval sea bishop, the Orkney carcass, or the Zuiyō-maru photos? Share your own favorite sea story, and I might read it in the next video. Until then, keep your lanterns high and your knots tight. The sea remembers more than we do.